Hi, I'm Avon. My husband used to kiss my forehead and whisper, "I've got us covered." Turns out what he really meant was, "I've got the papers, the lawyers, the plan to take everything." He forged my signature, emptied our accounts, even tried to erase me from the company I built from scratch. But while he was busy plotting my downfall, I moved $900 million. First. Now he's jobless, penniless, and under federal investigation. But here's what still keeps me up some nights. Was it ever love, or just a setup from day one? Before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this, and where from? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. I woke up to silence. Not the comforting kind that wraps around you like a heavy blanket, but the sterile, sharp-edged kind that makes you sit up and wonder what's missing. The left side of the bed was cold, still tucked, still smooth. Dorian hadn't even tried to fake sleep beside me tonight. I glanced at the clock. 2:13 a.m. The faint blue glow from the hallway bled in through the slightly cracked bedroom door. I stayed still, straining my ears. A whisper. Not the whisper of someone on a call. This was deliberate, careful, too quiet for confidence, too rehearsed for coincidence. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, the hardwood cool beneath my feet. I moved slowly, the way you do when you don't want to admit you already know what you'll find. Down the hallway, Dorian's office door was ajar, just barely. A slice of light escaped beneath the frame. He hated overheads, always used the floor lamp with the amber glow. Said it was easier on his eyes. Now it cast long, thin shadows across the hallway, like blades. I stood there, barefoot, heartbeat creeping up my throat, and listened. "She doesn't suspect a thing," Dorian's voice murmured, smooth as always, not affectionate, not uncertain, cold, confident. There was a pause, then another voice, muffled and low. Male, possibly older. I couldn't catch what he said. Dorian answered, "Almost done. A few more days, then we file." I stepped back, not rushed, but not slow either. My fingers found the bedroom wall, steadying me as the hallway stretched too long, too bright, too unfamiliar. I slid back into bed and pulled the covers up, just before the door creaked open again. He walked in casually, no sign of guilt, just the quiet movements of a man used to secrecy. The mattress dipped slightly beside me. His breath was steady, slower than mine. I kept my breathing even, eyes closed, but inside me, something fractured. Not loud, just final. By morning, the world was pretending to be normal again. The kettle hummed softly in the background. I stood in the kitchen in my robe, my phone resting on the counter while I scrolled through the banking app. I hadn't checked it in months, maybe years. Dorian took care of all that, he said. He loved numbers. I loved freedom. Until now. The screen loaded slowly. Then the list of transactions appeared. My stomach turned before my mind had time to catch up. $900. Withdrawal. Last Friday. $200. Withdrawal. 2 weeks ago, $1,050. Transfer. 3 days before that, $850. Withdrawal. Spread evenly, almost like they were timed not enough to alarm a stranger. But to me, it screamed. He wasn't draining accounts. He was testing the current, seeing how far he could go before setting off the alarm. The smell of freshly ground coffee broke my focus. "Checking the finances this early?" Dorian's voice drifted in from the doorway. He was rubbing his neck, yawning like he hadn't just rehearsed my erasure hours ago. I turned, keeping my face neutral. "Just looking over the monthly burn rate." He stepped in, poured himself a mug, and leaned casually against the counter. "You're overthinking. I moved some things into crypto and short-term bonds, safer long-term." I tilted my head, studied his face. The subtle tension around his eyes was the only tell. That, and the way he set his mug down before turning his gaze back toward me. "Didn't think it was worth bothering you," he added with that soft, patronizing tone men like him use to end conversations they don't want to have. I smiled. That was the moment something inside me stopped hoping. That evening, the penthouse felt colder than usual. I opened the hall closet to find an old cloth to dust the console, and my hand brushed against the frame. Our wedding photo, me in an off-shoulder ivory gown, him in a tailored midnight blue suit. We were young, stupid, and laughing about things that don't matter now, like florals and seating charts. I wiped a corner of the glass and paused. The frame had shifted over time. I lifted it, and a thin, folded paper fell from behind it. It was a note. I'd forgotten about it. "If I ever betray you, destroy me with grace. Dorian." It was a joke then, a cheeky line he scribbled after our honeymoon and tucked behind the photo, "for insurance," he said. But reading it now, it was prophecy. I ran my finger across the words. There was no smile this time, just something tight in my throat, not quite sadness, not quite rage, not yet. He came home late, said he was meeting a client. I didn't ask which one. Instead, I looked up from the app, still open, still displaying his drip-drip betrayal, and met his eyes, the same ones that used to say forever, and for the first time, I blinked, and lied back. I blinked once, slowly, just long enough to breathe past the ache. Then I smiled at him, soft, muted, as if I didn't know, as if I hadn't been staring at the evidence of his deception 10 seconds earlier. He kissed my cheek like it was any other Friday morning, told me he had back-to-back meetings, that he'd be home late. I nodded, handed him his travel mug, and watched him leave without saying a word. The door closed. My spine straightened. I picked up my phone and walked to the window, watching his car disappear down the steep street, then dialed the number I hadn't used in years, his office line. I let it ring once, then again. "Keen & Feldman," a young woman answered cheerfully. I softened my voice, pitching it a little higher. "Hi, I'm calling from Westbridge Legal, just confirming the receipt of power of attorney transfer documents for Mr. Dorian Keene." She didn't pause. "Yes. Received and notarized earlier this week, already on file with our compliance system." My stomach dropped. "Would you mind resending the confirmation email to the requesting party's address on file?" I asked calmly. "Sure. Do you need a copy of the signed documents too?" I swallowed. "Yes, that'd be great." "All right. Have a good one." I hung up. My hand was trembling. I had never signed a power of attorney transfer, never even discussed it. But if it had already been notarized... I grabbed my coat and keys. I didn't know exactly where I was headed yet, but I wasn't staying in that apartment 1 second longer. Downtown San Francisco, Friday afternoon. The legal district buzzed with its usual blend of espresso machines and high heels. I stopped by Belmore Cafe, ordered an herbal tea I wouldn't finish, and sat facing the glass, watching pedestrians pass without noticing the storm inside me. When the email arrived, I opened the attachment. It was a scanned legal form, stamped, sealed, and signed. My name sat at the bottom in sharp, familiar strokes, only I had never signed it. I stared at it long enough to remember the moment he must have stolen it. 3 weeks ago, he'd handed me a stack of invoices after dinner, smiling casually. "Just a few things from the lab, nothing major. Want to sign now? I'll scan later." I'd been on the phone, distracted. I didn't even glance. He'd used that signature, lifted it, transplanted it onto a legal document that handed over control of everything, not just the money, my medical power, business authority, full access. I clenched my jaw so hard it ached. A subtle ringing filled my ears. My hand squeezed the porcelain mug until it cracked down the middle, tea bleeding out slowly onto the table. I paid, cleaned up as best I could, and walked out before the staff noticed. The next stop was a small office near the Embarcadero. It shared a building with a dental clinic and a boutique dog grooming service. Nothing about it said, "life-altering fraud." I walked in. The woman behind the desk wore a crisp blazer and red lipstick. Her posture was impeccable. So was her memory. "Can I help you?" she asked politely, not recognizing me. But I recognized her. Callista Rames, Dorian's ex, the one who used to linger too long at fundraisers, who brought him lattes with hand-scribbled notes, who once called him E in front of me like I was the assistant. I smiled tightly. "Yes, I'm here to inquire about a document you recently notarized for Dorian Keene. She paused. I'm sorry, our records are confidential unless you're the client. I'm his wife. Her brows lifted just slightly. Well then, I'm sure everything was done properly. I'm sure you believe that, I replied calmly. But I'd still like to see the notary log. She folded her hands. It's legal until someone contests it. Are you contesting it? I held her gaze. Not yet. She looked away first. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before turning the engine on. The air felt too thick, like it was pressing into my chest. I scrolled through my old voicemails until I found the one I wasn't sure I wanted to hear again. Dorian's voice, warm and low. Everything we built, I did for us. At the time, I believed him. Now I knew better. He did it for us, yes, but only as long as I was useful. As long as I signed what he put in front of me, kept the peace, made the speeches, smiled beside him. I closed the app. My reflection in the rearview mirror didn't flinch. No more waiting. No more almost. No more hoping he'd wake up and choose decency. And for the first time in 15 years, I opened a folder without asking him. I opened the folder slowly, my fingers brushing over the tab like I was touching something sacred or something dead. Inside were the quarterly updates. Nothing new at first glance, but as I flipped the pages, a pit began to form in my stomach. 3 days later, Monday morning arrived with fog rolling in off the bay and a calendar alert for the Medicines Board meeting flashing on my phone. I wore gray slacks and a soft cream blouse, neutral armor. My heels clicked softly through the polished halls of our office downtown. I'd co-founded this place, pitched the seed round, stood on that stage during our Series A when no one thought a woman could build a diagnostic platform that outperformed pharma giants. Now I walked in like a guest. Dorian was already seated, tie undone just enough to say he was relaxed, but not so much as to seem disrespectful. His smile didn't reach his eyes when he looked up at me. The meeting opened with pleasantries, updates on clinical trial progress, projected licensing revenue. I kept my voice calm, asked the usual questions, offered insights when needed. Then it happened. The projector clicked to a slide titled Leadership Realignment, Q2 Filing. There were photos, names, and titles underneath: Chief Science Officer, Chief Operations, CFO, but no mention of co-founder. No mention of me. It stayed up for just a second too long. I didn't react, not visibly. My hand didn't twitch. My breath didn't catch. Could I get a printed copy of today's deck? I asked casually. One of the interns nodded and slid it down the table. I flipped to the page again. The same omission. At the bottom, in small print, updated as of Q2 reorganization filing, authorized by D. Keene. I glanced up at him. He was focused on his coffee like nothing had happened. I smiled. The meeting ended 15 minutes later. We all stood, exchanged the usual nods and see you next weeks. I walked out slower than usual, let the others get ahead of me in the hallway. The moment I stepped into the elevator, I felt the back of my neck burn. I'd just been erased, quietly, strategically. On paper, I didn't exist anymore. That evening, I sat in my apartment surrounded by the silence only betrayal can bring. I opened our investment portal, logged in, and started combing through sub-accounts that hadn't been touched in months. At first, nothing seemed out of place. Then I noticed it, an $18 million transaction listed as interim liquidity repositioning, buried under layers of jargon. But I knew our ledgers. I called Max, our operations director, who I'd known for 8 years. Hey, I said lightly. Quick one. Who approved that transfer from the Vanguard vault last week? He hesitated. Dorian told me you'd signed off. I closed my eyes. Did you see the signed authorization? He paused again. It was on record. Your signature. He said you'd emailed it over directly to legal. Thanks, Max, I said. That's all I needed. I hung up. That forged signature again. He didn't just use it once. He was playing a long game, quietly rewriting our company, shifting assets, cleaning up behind himself before the storm hit, and he thought I'd never notice. I didn't call Dorian, I didn't scream. Instead, I picked up my second phone, one he didn't know about, and messaged Anna. Anna wasn't just a friend. She was the kind of woman who knew what documents shouldn't look like. She once pulled a senator's brother out of a fraud case without blinking. All I typed was, "I think I need to disappear." She didn't ask questions. She simply replied, "Give me 6 hours." The sun had long set when I poured myself a glass of red. The apartment was dim, the city glittering below like a distant memory of power I no longer trusted. I walked to the hallway console. The framed wedding photo still sat where it always had, an untouched relic in a place that had changed too much. I picked it up, held it for a moment. Then I turned it over. There, in the back flap, was the handwritten message he'd written to me years ago. "If I ever betray you, destroy me with grace." It used to make me cry. This time I said it aloud, word for word. "If I ever betray you, destroy me with grace." But my voice wasn't shaking. It was cold, not grieving, not hopeful. It was sharpening. I hadn't planned a war, but if they'd started one, I'd finish it. The words echoed in my head as I stirred cream into my coffee, watching it swirl into a muted storm. Tuesday morning filtered through the blinds of my office. Medisense buzzed outside my door, assistants hurrying, voices rising, the soft click of keyboards tapping away at deadlines. But inside my office, silence clung to everything. At 11:13 a.m., I picked up my phone and texted Narina. "Lunch? Off-site?" She replied in less than 30 seconds. "Meet you at the roof. 15?" I grabbed my coat, left my laptop open just enough to suggest I'd be back, and took the elevator up. The rooftop cafe was mostly empty, save for 2 tourists snapping skyline photos near the edge. Narina sat near the back, tucked in a corner booth, stirring iced tea with a straw that bent like her nerves. When I slid into the seat across from her, she didn't look up. She spoke low, just above a whisper. "If anyone asks, we were just catching up. Casual chat. Nothing heavy." I nodded. "Of course." She glanced around, then reached into her tote. A slim silver flash drive appeared in her palm, small enough to hide in a breath. "I never showed you this," she murmured. "And I don't have it after today." I took it gently, slipping it into my coat pocket without blinking. "Tell me." "Emails," she whispered. "Back and forth between Dorian and most of the board. Dates go back almost 7 months. Subject line was, 'Transitioning her out quietly, leave the press to me.'" My jaw didn't clench, my spine didn't stiffen, but something inside me shrank, a part of me that had been holding out hope that this was just impulsive, messy, thoughtless, not premeditated. "He wrote that?" I asked. She nodded, then leaned in, eyes shining with something between fear and apology. "And there's one part I think you should see. You may not want to." I waited. He said, quote, "She's brilliant, but soft. She'll fold." I sat back. For a second, the breeze didn't feel cool anymore. It felt like heat against my neck. Soft. That word didn't sting because it was untrue. It stung because I remembered Dorian once whispering it into my ear in bed, back when we still believed in each other. "Your softness," he'd said, "is what makes you dangerous. But also disposable." Disposable. I smiled slowly. "Thank you for telling me." She looked like she might cry. After what they did, I couldn't sit on this anymore. I know I'm risking my job." "You're not," I said. "Not with me." That night, after dinner alone and a brief shower, I set my wine glass on the coffee table, turned on my secondary laptop, and opened a clean session. I installed encryption software I'd paid for years ago, but never had to use. I rerouted every personal asset I controlled, stocks, savings, trusts, into a holding company under my name only. The rest, liquidable or not, would be moved the next day. I called Anna on Signal. "The clock starts now," I said. "We do this fast." "You sure?" "Dorian will file within weeks, Maybe days. I'm not waiting for him to make the first move. Anna exhaled slowly. Then we're going scorched earth? No, I said. Not yet, but we're lighting the matches. After the call, I walked to the hallway, the carpet familiar beneath my bare feet, and opened the drawer where the wedding photo used to sit atop the console. I placed the frame inside, face down. Not in the trash. Not because I couldn't part with it, but because someday I'd need to show it, use it, remind him. It would be a witness. I was brushing my teeth when my phone buzzed twice, then 3 times. I dried my hands, picked it up, and saw Narina's name on the screen. Text 1. They just wiped the whole chain. Text 2. Everything. Board threads, admin folders. Text 3. He's cleaning house. I didn't panic. I walked to my living room, opened the drawer in the credenza where I kept my backups, and pulled out the encrypted clone I'd made hours earlier, plugged it in, clicked the folder labeled Founders Contingency, every email, every signature, every timestamp, safe. I stared at the screen, letting the weight of it settle in my chest. They knew. They suspected I was stirring, and they thought I'd sleep through it. They thought I was the one sleeping. Let's wake them up. They thought I was the one sleeping. Let's wake them up. A week passed, quietly, deliberately. I didn't storm out of boardrooms. I didn't scream or cry. I smiled. I signed invoices. I answered polite emails. I nodded at Dorian when he offered me coffee in the morning, like none of this was happening. But behind that smile, I was building escape velocity. And on a gray, misty Tuesday, I made the first real move. The call to Zurich wasn't dramatic, just a clean, encrypted connection from my study. A familiar voice answered, Marcus Baumann, a private banker I'd met years ago during a conference in London. Back then, he'd told me quietly over whiskey, if you ever need to move something no one sees, call me first. But I did. I need a full restructure, I said. Everything under my personal name and anything tied to Dorian, cut. There was a pause on the line, then a calm question. Are you sure, Ms. Keene? I stared out the window at the San Francisco skyline. Marcus, I've never been more certain. We walked through asset lists, accounts, trusts, and holdings. Company stock converted into cold vault security, properties moved under shell corporations I owned in full, nearly $900 million restructured in less than 72 hours. Everything I'd built, every dollar I'd once let Dorian help manage, reclaimed. He wouldn't see it until he reached for it and found air. The night after the transfer completed, I came home to something almost laughable. Dinner. The lights were dimmed, candles flickered on the table, and the scent of grilled halibut and lemon filled the kitchen. Dorian stood there, apron on, wine already poured. He grinned like it was our 5-year anniversary. Thought I'd cook tonight, he said, all casual charm. You've been so busy lately, we should slow down. I nodded, hung my coat, and slipped off my shoes. We ate, talked about mundane things, the latest biotech press, a new restaurant opening, someone's wedding on the board. Then, as he reached for a second pour of wine, he said it like it was nothing. I've been thinking, maybe we should revisit the prenup, just in case. I took a sip of wine and smiled across the table. Of course, bring the paperwork. And just like that, he thought he was still leading. But he didn't know he was walking into a cage I had already locked behind him. The following afternoon, I received a text from an unknown number. You're being watched. Step back while you can. See. It didn't take a genius. I called Callista and suggested we meet. She picked a place in the Marina District, upscale, crowded enough for noise but quiet enough to talk. She arrived in a cream blazer, hair perfect, sunglasses perched like armor. I didn't pretend to be surprised. Watching me now, Callista? She slid into the seat across from me. You've made it hard not to. I'm not hiding. No, she said, leaning forward. You're poking at things that used to be buried. Dorian doesn't like being challenged. I held her gaze. Then he shouldn't have underestimated me. She tilted her head. This isn't a game, Avon. He's protected. If you keep digging, he'll fight back, and you won't win. I smiled, slow and steady. Tell him. I'm not challenging him. I'm replacing him. Her mouth twitched like she didn't know whether to be impressed or terrified. Good. That night, back in my penthouse, I stood in front of the console drawer where the wedding photo had slept in silence. I pulled it out. It didn't shake me anymore. It didn't even sting. It just looked small. I slid it into a manila envelope, sealed it, and wrote in dark ink across the front, "For court." I wasn't keeping it to mourn something lost. I was keeping it because when the time came, that little message scrawled in his handwriting would matter more than he ever imagined. If I ever betray you, destroy me with grace. Grace, I had. But I also had evidence, and I wasn't signing divorce papers. I was preparing to bury them with evidence. The envelope arrived just after sunrise. I was still in my robe, sipping lukewarm coffee, trying to breathe through the silence when the intercom buzzed. "Delivery for Mrs. Keene," the voice said. The name made my stomach twist. I opened the front door to find a courier in a navy jacket, eyes avoiding mine as he handed me a manila envelope. "Signature, please." I signed. Irony wasn't lost on me. Back inside, I sliced the seal open with a butter knife. What slid out wasn't just paper. It was a grenade, a formal notice of divorce proceedings, filed under Dorian's name. Attached was a civil lawsuit accusing me of asset concealment, corporate fraud, and malicious manipulation of joint holdings. Allegedly, I'd siphoned funds during our marriage and deliberately altered Medicent's records to destabilize board oversight. Each page was worse than the last. My name, twisted. My role, reduced. And on the last document, neatly typed above a scanned signature, my own name. But I had never signed it. I stared at the ink, the familiar curl at the top of the A. It had been lifted from a billing slip months ago, the one he'd waved in front of me while he talked about dinner plans. "Sign here, babe. I'll scan it later." He scanned it all right. Onto his warhead. I stood frozen, not in shock, but in calculation. My hands trembled slightly, but my breathing steadied. And then, without warning, I laughed. A dry, short sound that ended almost before it started. This was the play, not just legal sabotage, public character assassination, and I had just stepped into the arena. By noon, my name was already trending, on the wrong side of every financial blog. Silicon Valley power couple splits amidst allegations of embezzlement. A curated leak from Dorian's PR team, no doubt. The piece cited anonymous sources close to the company and quoted phrases like unstable behavior, withholding records, and questionable judgment. When I walked into Medicent's, every hallway was hushed, eyes flicked up and away. People moved just a little too quickly when I passed. I stepped into my office and found Rachel, my assistant, hunched over her desk. "Did you do this?" I asked. She looked up, startled. "What?" "The article, the leak." Her face flushed. "No, but you should see this." She spun her monitor around. On the screen was a thread from a private tech forum. A user called Inside Track 77 had posted a detailed account of AK's alleged siphoning strategy, complete with speculative figures and the timing of the asset transfer. "They're trying to paint you as someone who saw the divorce coming and cashed out before he could file," Rachel said softly. I didn't respond. I just turned the screen back and walked into my office, shutting the door behind me. The garage was dim and stale. I sat in my parked car for 42 minutes, engine off, no music, just breathing. It wasn't the betrayal that weighed on me, it was the orchestration, the cold brilliance of it, how easily the truth could be manipulated into something venomous. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't broken, but because I didn't have time to fall apart. My mother's voice floated back to me. She used to say, "Silence protects dignity." But sometimes, silence is how they bury you. I'd always believed in restraint, in being the adult in the room, but maybe restraint was exactly what he was counting on. I picked up my phone, typed one word to Anna, Enough. By nightfall, the response was filed. A full denial of all allegations, a countersuit for defamation, a motion to seal all records citing reputational damage and financial sabotage. Anna's voice over the phone wasn't calm. It was loaded. "We're not just protecting what you have," she said. "We're going to make them pay for even trying." And for the first time, I didn't feel like a woman trying to survive her husband. I felt like a strategist preparing for battle. I stood in front of the mirror that night. My reflection didn't look furious or devastated. She looked still, composed, like she had nothing left to explain. Dorian had chosen a public war. He'd forgotten who taught him how to fight. The courthouse was too cold, not because of the temperature. San Francisco in April could be erratic, but because everything inside that room felt engineered to drain warmth. Fluorescent lights, neutral walls, unsmiling faces. I adjusted the collar of my blazer and inhaled through my nose. Across the room, Dorian sat, three-piece suit, pristine hair, flanked by a small army of lawyers. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. His smirk was loud enough. The judge entered promptly at 10:30. Anna rose first, steady and deliberate. "Your Honor," she said, "today we address two filings, the plaintiff's claim of marital fraud and asset concealment, and the counterclaim for defamation, forgery, and malicious prosecution." Dorian leaned back, confident, as if the outcome were already inked in his favor. Anna turned to the projector. "Let's start with the timeline, shall we?" The room dimmed slightly as the screen flickered on. Anna clicked through the slides with surgical precision. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. A forensic analyst took the stand, presenting a chart that compared the alleged transfers Dorian's team claimed I made to the actual dates when those financial accounts were created. "These transfers," the expert said, tapping the screen, "are time-stamped May 3rd, 4th, and 6th. But this specific account didn't exist until July 15th. There's a public registration trail for the fund. Anyone can verify it." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge's brow furrowed. One of Dorian's lawyers adjusted his tie, visibly sweating. Anna's tone remained unchanged. "So, to clarify, Your Honor, the plaintiff's evidence alleges transactions before the account itself existed." The judge stared over his glasses. "Is that accurate, Mr. Coates?" he asked Dorian's lead counsel. Coates cleared his throat. "We may need to review the submitted documents." "A recess, then," the judge declared. 30 minutes. I stood slowly. My knees didn't buckle, my hands didn't tremble. I'd prepared for this, for them to try to bury me under a mountain of forged evidence and hollow accusations, but today I was the one with the shovel. In the hallway, Dorian intercepted me. No cameras, no court reporter, just raw venom under a polished exterior. "You think this changes anything?" he hissed. "They don't care about truth. You'll always look dirty now." I smiled gently. "Maybe. But you'll look like a fraud with a timeline problem." I paused. "And juries hate sloppy liars." He opened his mouth, but I was already turning away. Back inside, Anna stood for cross-examination. "We'd like to submit Exhibit K into evidence." The bailiff carried the small envelope up to the bench. The judge glanced at the contents, then passed it to the jury. I knew what it was. So did Dorian. Inside was our wedding photo, the one from the hallway, the one I'd nearly burned, but the back of it, that mattered now. It had Dorian's handwriting, authenticated and dated. "If I ever betray you, destroy me with grace." There was no objection, not even from his lawyers, because how could they explain that away? I didn't glance at him. I looked only at the jury. One woman in the back, gray hair, pearl earrings, nodded slightly, like she understood exactly what had been done to me. No yelling, no theatrics, just truth, heavy and undeniable. The judge's gavel fell. The echo of the judge's gavel was still fading in my chest when Anna's phone lit up with an unknown number. We had barely stepped out of the courthouse when she answered, walking just a few feet ahead of me on the marble floor of the lobby. Her shoulders squared as she listened. Then she slowed, turned her face halfway toward me and said with quiet clarity, "That was his lawyer. They want to talk." We sat in Anna's office an hour later, tea growing cold between us. "They're offering a private settlement," Anna said. "7 figures. Confidentiality clause included. They'll drop everything, if you do too." I stared out the window at the fog curling off the bay. "No," I said. "Tell them we're not interested in silence." Anna smiled faintly. "That's what I hoped you'd say." By Tuesday, the headlines started softening their language, using words like alleged, pending investigation, and sources close to the situation. But by Friday, the tone shifted again. That morning, I received a letter. Official seal, certified mail. Inside, a single line changed the air around me. "The state of California has opened a formal investigation into document fraud and financial misrepresentation." Dorian's name was printed twice. Callista's once. Anna didn't even blink. "They wanted a war. Now they've got the feds watching." That afternoon, we filed a civil suit for reputational damage, with both compensatory and punitive claims. Anna's hands didn't shake when she signed. Mine didn't either. Later that night, while I was folding towels in my laundry room, something so banal it grounded me. My phone buzzed. A text from an old colleague at Dorian's firm, someone who used to share lunch breaks with me back when I was still Mrs. Keene. "He's out." Just that. 2 words, no punctuation. But it was enough. Within hours, the firm released a formal statement. "Integrity is at the heart of our values. Mr. Dorian Keene is no longer affiliated with our institution." I didn't smile. Not yet. But I did turn on the TV. By morning, financial news networks had latched on. "Investor accused of multi-million-dollar forgery." From tech darling to defendant. "Founder replaced, fraud allegations mount." Dorian's face was everywhere, and not in the way he liked. A friend at the bank called discreetly to say his accounts had been flagged. Another source said he sold his car within hours. The penthouse? Quietly listed under a holding company, but I knew the name. He was hemorrhaging. And I? I had nothing left to prove. Just records to close. That night, I stood barefoot on my balcony. Fog rolled over the hills. A glass of red wine balanced in my hand. Somewhere across the city, Dorian was probably screaming at someone. Maybe alone, maybe not. I walked back inside, opened my file cabinet, took out the wedding photo. The back still bore his handwriting, his vow, his threat, his prophecy. I slid it into a fresh manila envelope labeled simply, "Closed." Then I opened my laptop, scrolled to the folder marked Keen Files, and deleted it without hesitation. Gone. Not because I'd forgotten, but because I remembered enough. And I had delivered, gracefully. But even after justice, healing doesn't come on a schedule. 2 weeks had passed. The headlines were quieter now. Dorian's name had stopped trending. Investors stopped calling. The last of the legal paperwork had been filed, notarized, stamped, and yet I still hadn't touched the final drawer in what used to be our bedroom. That morning, I stood in front of it, barefoot on the hardwood, fingers grazing the cold metal handle. It was the only drawer I hadn't opened since everything imploded. Not because I was afraid of what was inside, but because I wasn't ready to see who I had been when I'd still believed in forever. The drawer didn't creak. It slid open easily, almost gently. Inside, a journal. Mine. One I hadn't seen in years. Dorian must have tucked it away when we moved. Maybe he thought I'd want it back. Maybe he just didn't want to throw it away himself. But next to it, tucked beneath a scarf I hadn't worn since our honeymoon, was a photo. Not one from our wedding. This one was different. It was candid. He'd taken it one Saturday morning in the kitchen, back when we still had burnt toast and inside jokes. I was laughing, head tilted back, eyes half closed. I looked light. I held the image longer than I meant to, then I set it aside. Not in the trash, not to burn, just aside. I wasn't erasing anything anymore. I was moving past it. At the bottom of the journal, a folded note slipped out. Unsigned. You were always better than I deserved. You still are. No apology, no name, just the shadow of a man who finally saw the reflection he'd run from. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat there, cross-legged on the floor, breathing in silence that didn't ache anymore. Later that week, I stood behind a podium at the annual family law conference hosted by the foundation I'd quietly launched last year. The room was filled with women, some divorced, some still married, all scarred in their own ways. The topic was printed on the screen behind me: protecting yourself without becoming someone you're not. I spoke without notes. I didn't need them. A woman in the back raised her hand. Gray streaked through her ponytail. Her voice trembled when she asked, "How did you know when it was over?" I didn't hesitate. When I stopped waiting for him to say sorry, and I said it to myself instead. There was silence, then nods, then applause. Not loud, but honest. Later, walking home through downtown, I passed a storefront window. The display was nothing special, just fall scarves and a mannequin in a trench coat. But in the glass, I saw myself. My reflection wasn't perfect, but it was whole. Older, sharper, still standing. In my bag, buried between a folded speech and a granola bar, was a page from the back of the wedding photo, the one I had once read with disbelief, then rage, then finally, clarity. "If I ever betray you, destroy me with grace." I whispered to no one in particular. Grace didn't destroy him. The truth did. Back at home, the penthouse was quiet. No echo of voices, no doors closing too hard, no strained silences, just stillness. I lit a single candle, not for morning, for light. One glass of wine, one chair by the window, one woman, complete. Life isn't always fair, and sometimes the person who says forever is the one who tries to erase you. But if you've ever clawed your way out of betrayal, not with rage, but with grace, then this story was for you. Have you ever lived something like this? Tell me in the comments. I read every one.